Cold War and Revolution, Soviet-American Rivalry and the Origins of the Chinese Civil War by Arne Westad. Arne Westad's Cold War and Revolution, Soviet-American Rivalry and the Origins of the Chinese Civil War examines the roles that the United States and the Soviet Union played in helping to create the conditions for China's Civil War. The book covers the period from roughly mid-1944 until early 1946. Westad begins by examining the American and Soviet positions toward China at Yalta, and the positions of the Chinese nationalist government under Chiang Kai-shek and the Chinese communists under Mao Zedong. Westad noted that both the United States and the Soviet Union both sought stability in Asia and to ensure that China would not be able to challenge each of them in any meaningful way after the war. Additionally, Chiang Kai-shek was happy to have both powers back his government in a formal treaty. Quote, a driving force of this process was Chiang Kai-shek's attempts to compensate for his military weakness by achieving foreign support for his regime. Chiang was firmly in command of Chinese policy at this time, Westad wrote. Chiang had to balance many factors to keep his government in power, and it was Chiang alone who decided upon the deals he struck at Yalta, which would theoretically maintain Chinese stability, not his advisors. Westad noted that Chiang's agreements with Stalin must be seen in a similar light as those of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact 6 years earlier. To counter what appeared to be the growing political strength of the nationalists, Mao reached out to other groups both within China and without, notably to the United States. When these overtures only met with partial success, by Mao's standards, the Communists began to prepare for civil war. In Washington, President Harry Truman still hoped for a diplomatic decision in China and dispatched the former Chief of the Army General Staff, George C. Marshall, to Asia. This mission, however, faltered as both sides in China increasingly prepared for war. It was here, Westad argued, that Chiang distanced himself from the Soviets because of domestic hostility to the USSR's occupation of Manchuria and believed he could win a war against Mao's forces with U.S. backing. Suya Chang wrote in the Journal of Asian Studies that, quote, Westad makes an admirable attempt to present a multifocused interpretation of relations among the nations, though believed that the work suffered from contradictory statements, such as those of the readiness of the communists for war. Shu Guangzhong wrote in the American Historical Review that, quote, there can be little doubt that this is an excellent study of the origins of the Chinese Civil War. Zhang did criticize Westad's treatment of all leaders as more or less equally rational. Westad makes many fine points in this book, though some of his observations don't quite work. The comparison between the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and the nationalist-Soviet agreements at Yalta don't really appear to be appropriate. The Nazi-Soviet pact was built upon military expediency for Hitler, not upon his fear of an internal communist revolution. Zhang is correct as well in the criticism that all actors are more or less treated as coolly logical decision-makers, each pursuing their nation's agendas rationally. Westad doesn't appear to offer much of a sense of immediacy for the pressures these men acted under beyond the general contours of the political problems. Still, Westad offers a wonderful, multifaceted approach to the subject, drawing upon a wealth of Chinese and American sources. Rather than simply offering a third-world country as a sideshow in the bipolar struggle between the United States and Soviet Russia, Westad highlights China's internal politics and problems, and how the two great powers' manipulations factored into China's civil war.